Hello, everyone, and welcome to the CoLab. CoLab is SpacetoCo's free webinar series. My name is Teresa, and I am the Global Marketing Manager at SpacetoCo, and I am so excited to be hosting my first CoLab session today. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of Dharawal country, the land on which I'm joining you from in Wollongong, New South Wales today. And I'd like to pay my respects to elders past, present, and those emerging. I also wish to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the various lands on which all of our participants are joining us from today. Now, we have a large number of people joining us today, which is so exciting. Some of you have attended CoLabs before, some of you are our SpacetoCo customers, and some of you may have never heard of SpacetoCo or CoLabs before. So for those of you who are new to this, like me, I would like to point out a few housekeeping items to help you get the most out of the session. So first, you can rest assured that this session is being recorded. My colleagues are working behind the scenes and will ensure that this recording is sent to all registrants via email following the session. And it will also be available to watch on demand on our website shortly. We will also share a copy of Wayne's contact details, who's our speaker today, and his slides after the session. Now, throughout the session, we encourage you to ask questions, and my colleagues and I will be monitoring the chat and the Q&A tools, which you'll find in the bottom right corner of your screen. Feel free to post a question or comments at any time, and Wayne will answer as many as he can at the end of his presentation. We'd also love to know who you are and where you're joining from, so feel free to say hi and introduce yourselves in the chat now. Now, finally, we won't be focusing on our system today, but for those of you who aren't familiar with SpacetoCo, I wanted to give you a little background about who we are and what we do. At SpacetoCo, we are committed to connecting communities by simplifying bookings. From a technology perspective, we offer an all-in-one venue management platform and marketplace built for councils, community centres, and housing associations across Australia, New Zealand, and the UK. Our venue management platform gives you the tools to streamline your booking processes so you have time to focus on what actually matters, which is community engagement and impact, as we all know. Now, our marketplace brings communities to life by making it easier than ever to find and book community venues. From special events to sporting activities, our marketplace offers venues to suit all occasions. And beyond our technology, we create free resources and webinars like this CoLab today, designed to help people working in community venues work more effectively and efficiently. These are all available on our website, together with all of the recordings of our past CoLabs, so be sure to check them out after today's session. So now that you know who we are and what we do, let's get into today's session. We're going to be keeping to our strict 1 hour format because we know you're busy and we want to respect your time. But we also want to make sure that you get the most out of this really important session. The topic for today's session is event risk management for councils and community venues. This is going to be a practical session for venue teams who are ready to move beyond tick box compliance and build safer and more resilient events. Our fabulous speaker today is Wayne Middleton. Now, I've had the pleasure of working with Wayne before, and I know him to be an absolute expert in his field. Wayne is the founder of Reliance Risk and brings more than 3 decades of experience advising governments, venue authorities, sporting organisations, and major event operators across Australasia and internationally. Wayne's background spans senior in-house leadership roles and extensive consulting work in complex, high-risk environments where public safety, operational continuity, and reputation are tightly linked. He brings a deep understanding of how risk plays out in real operations, not just on paper, and we are so happy to have him joining us today. So I'd like to warmly welcome to the CoLab Wayne Middleton. Just a moment while we bring him onto the screen. Hi, Wayne.
Hi, Teresa. Hi, everyone. Thanks for the opportunity to chat. I was just going through the chat list of where people are from there. So it looks like we've got lots from New Zealand and lots from WA and everywhere in between. So thanks for giving up an hour of your time, and we'll try and make this as practical as we can. So
beautiful.
Should I just jump into it?
You jump in. I'll hop off the screen and over to you. Thank you so much.
Great. All right, no worries. Look, thanks everyone again. So I put together about 25 slides just to kind of set the scene, if you like. It's not a lecture, please, it's a conversation. So there's a Q&A button there. We'll probably save those questions to the end. I think we've got a hard stop at midday my time in about 55 minutes or so. So we'll try and get through as much as we can in the set presentation, and then we'll spend the last 15 or 20 minutes, if you like, just going through any questions that you might have. A little bit about myself. So I've been in the venues and events industry for a long time. I started way back in the late 80s at the Institute of Sport in Canberra, which gave me a really good, I guess, grounding in sports and venue management. And from there, I moved to Sydney in '99 and worked on the Sydney Olympics as the safety manager for the games. And it was like someone putting a fire hose in my mouth and turning it on. I had 18 months to put together an event safety program that I haven't done anything as big since, to be frank. That was 6 million patrons, 110,000 workforce, several thousand employees, a lot of contractors, and a lot of moving parts. I think we had 28 competition venues, 40 venues in total. And so it gave me a really good grounding in not just venue and event management, but what success looks like. So since then, I've been able to sort of, I guess, have a career that's sent me around the world several times over. I do a lot of stuff in the US. I'm involved with the Venue Managers Association here in Australia and the International Association of Venue Managers. I founded the Institute of Venue Safety and Security, which I'd encourage people to have a look at. That's in August here in Sydney, but also teach at the American course that's the equivalent. I guess my background then gives me a really good founding in a whole range of different ways that people do risk management. And back in the Sydney Olympics days, I facetiously say some people couldn't spell risk. It was a concept that was only brand new. The health and safety laws only changed in New South Wales in 2000 to become more risk-based. But what we've seen over that time is a recognition that risk management has become more and more ingrained in and accepted as core business in not just venue management, but event management. And those two disciplines, whilst there's a lot of crossover, are quite different. And as we're talking today about applying that in those settings, obviously councils host events themselves, but they also obviously operate venues or operate public space. And so you're sitting on, I guess, both sides of that ledger, where you're either preparing materials yourself and then ensuring that those materials are delivered in the context of event delivery, or you're vetting third parties who are preparing those materials on their behalf and submitting them to you for review and approval. So I wanted to just spend some time as we're going through the slides today and bounce between those two angles, because I think that's important. That the days of just taking a booking, ticking the box, taking the money, flicking the keys, I think for the most part are over, unless that event represents very low risk for the business. And there's lots of case studies out there where it's gone wrong, and the learnings from that show that we really have to roll the sleeves up and get involved more so. Now, my background, again, I just did a little scribble before about some of the events I've been involved with. Just before I jump into that, I will say this does not constitute legal advice. And so whilst we might talk about some of the legal ramifications of event risk management, I'd encourage you to go and get your own advice from a qualified legal practitioner. But some of the events I've done over 1,000 events, either provided advice or assisted in delivering. Public venues, stadiums, arenas, performing arts centres, convention exhibition centres, public spaces, public parklands, running events, billy cart events, fishing tournaments, ocean swims, surfing competitions, marathons, participation events, entertainment events, music festivals, concerts, lifestyle, food and wine festivals, Anzac Day celebrations, signage reviews, cliff walk pathways, safety and design, the list goes on. The moral to the story is that whilst they're all different, the principles are largely the same. And so we'll talk through those principles as we go today. We'll touch on some of the incidents that I mentioned and some of those learnings that we get from that. We'll talk a little bit about some of the compliance obligations and some of the risk management principles, which I think give you a good foundation in being able to apply that in different settings. We'll talk about some practical tools and obviously some of the emerging risks that we see or are seeing more of over recent times. All right, so why event risk management matters more than ever before? Well, it's because we're being more successful in how we promote events and more people are coming. There's more public events. I think, post-COVID, people are more engaged in the face-to-face aspects of community and bringing people together. We've got more councils, and we see that. Reliance Risk is the business that I operate, and I founded it 20 years ago, and we work all over Australia and in New Zealand, and we see more and more public spaces being activated either because of development or because there's a community issue that brings people together. So we see more businesses looking for hosting events, and there's obviously the desire to deliver that safely. I think there's an expectation when you either sell a ticket or you invite people to come to your event that safety is a core value, that there's an expectation that you have your act together. Safety in broad terms can also obviously mean security. And we're going to unpack some of those things as we go and look at some of those different hazard types. I encourage you to take an all hazards view, which means that there are many things that can go wrong with your event. And if you apply the same process with a slightly different lens for each of those, you can capture them and help deliver successful events. Now, we see things like severe weather is getting worse. There's an ongoing issue, as we all know, with regards to conflict in other parts of the world. Some of that is coming back more so to us. But we've also got the traditional aspects of event planning, such as crowd capacity. And when we host successful events and they're open to the public, if we're not putting a fence up, that can create some issues for us. So we'll unpack that in a bit more detail as we go. And of course, as I mentioned earlier, there are a number of complexities that come with hosting events, particularly given in many cases we have to engage third-party suppliers to help deliver some of those goods and services. Quite often, security companies, cleaning and waste companies, catering businesses all engage large numbers of people. And they, in some public venues, can be the largest workforce. So that comes with some challenges. It comes with some legal challenges as well, particularly with regards to work health and safety. So we'll dive into that as we go in a bit more detail. Okay, so the modern reality, and I think we've all seen this, and I guess I think back to, I live in Sydney, and Vivid's just been on recently, and Vivid's been going for several decades now. And for those of you who've attended Vivid, it's a highly successful public event, and it's filled bed nights many times over in what was previously a very quiet time of the year. In fact, some would argue it's been a bit of a victim of its own success over certain years. If you think back to, and I'm guessing it's more than 10 years ago now, it's had its fair share of crowd density issues, people feeling like they're being penned into areas around Circular Quay that were overcrowded, and people, trying to get out of severe weather and climbing into, or trying to get into the train station there. And I'm sure there's other examples that people that are watching this could provide where we've thought 500 people will turn up and many more turn up. And this is, of course, one of the issues that we now have with social media and the reach that we have in promoting. We try and promote for success, but when we're overly successful, that then comes with some challenges around when is too much, and how do we manage our stakeholders that perhaps not just are involved directly with that event, but other parties, other council-related households and dwellings that perhaps aren't directly involved, but are involved with the congestion and the traffic and the parking that comes with hosting successful events in the community areas that are run by councils. So having some capacity to understand how many people are coming and what levers you've got available to, when those people do turn up, when's enough? So how do we monitor that? How do we know then, do we have a plan B if we need to shut things off? And how do we communicate that to the various stakeholders so that we don't end up creating a reputational risk that's far worse than the risks associated with it within itself? So as you know, reputation is something that's hard to gain and something that's very easy to lose. And again, with social media and local politics, those two things go hand in hand with regards to that reputational risk that comes with our events. All right, so I'll keep going. In terms of consequences, when we get things wrong, and we usually put these into several buckets. And for those of you who've done risk assessment in the past, you'll know that if you apply an all hazards approach, again, looking broadly at risk of things that could affect the success of your event, they usually fall into some of these categories. So safety is the obvious one. And again, we're talking about injury or worse. Operational disruption, either we have to cancel event, and of course, when we cancel events, that can be expensive, that can come with refunds. Some events purchase or attempt to purchase cancellation insurance is very expensive. And so quite often it's underwritten by council itself. And so there's major high disruption type incidents, and severe weather being the most obvious one of those. Are things that you can't always stop the weather from coming, but there are things that you can do to try and minimize some of those impacts. And the financial risk, not just as it relates to the physical assets, but obviously insurance is an important part of the risk management mix. And if we were having this conversation 20 years ago, probably maybe 25 plus, risk management was largely about insurance. My colleagues in North America still lean very heavily on the insurance market in terms of liability from loss, and that sort of skews the way that they apply risk management. We're lucky in this country in that we have health and safety laws which impose positive due diligence obligations on people conducting business or conducting events, in this case, particularly those where there's money changing hands and that it's not purely being delivered by volunteers. And those obligations then have a positive impact in forcing people to take safety seriously, and that has a flow-on effect in terms of how we manage not just our own workforce, but for the members of the public. And the regulatory framework, of course, we're all concerned about civil action, public liability being for one. I think back to when I was involved with the Sydney Olympics, there was something like 1,200 incidents that were recorded over the operating 60-day period. I was involved with a research project afterwards, and most commonly slips, trips and falls. In fact, I'd say of most public venues, 60% of the things that go wrong in your venue would relate to people slipping and tripping and falling. People are inherently clumsy. And they trip over their own feet. They'll trip upstairs. They'll trip over uneven surfaces. And the issue for us is we need to apply a consistent approach. If we're dealing with an event that's outdoors that is on rough surfaces, well, as long as we're consistent in that approach, then we're in a reasonable position. Where we have a pothole in the middle of an area that's completely flat, or other inconsistencies, there is an expectation, of course, that we're doing things to monitor those slip, trips and falls, and managing that. So that, civil action is one, health and safety laws is another, liquor licensing laws is another, food safety laws is another, and of course councils will have their own permitting requirements, place of public entertainment in Victoria, or other event permit requirements that are imposed by council for fire compliance and for structural integrity for anything that's being erected. So when you throw it all in together, there's quite a lot of stuff in that, and of course it should be a risk-based approach, meaning that if it's a low-risk event, if there's not much happening, there's not many moving parts, then in my view, you should have a lower level of due diligence requirement if it's a third party. However, you should have ways of understanding when risks are coming for an event, whether that event's risk profile represents something that you should be nervous about, and then you apply a higher level of due diligence across some of those consequence categories and be proactive in the way that you're asking questions about the event organizer, providing a level of confidence for you that they've got their act together. In terms of incidents that have happened in the past, turn the TV on and have a look. Every day there's something in the media that's either directly relevant to our industry or is happening to another industry but could happen to ours. I think of some of the cybersecurity incidents that we see on a reasonably frequent basis, particularly having our data hacked, and that's something that continues to grow in its frequency and its impact across all of our businesses, including councils. I've got just some other examples that you may recall there, things like the jumping castle that happened in, I think it was 2021 in Tasmania, a number of children that were killed, and action taken by the regulator in relation to, in this case, an amusement device that wasn't installed as it was required to by the manufacturer. Now there's standards around how event organisers are supposed to install these and maintain them. There's supposed to be checks and checklists completed, and of course the responsibility then, I would argue, for councils would be to make sure that that paperwork is being completed and being submitted, and that the provider of jumping castles and other leisure and amusement activities are qualified and competent. And there's in most states there's regulatory frameworks that sit over the top of those devices because they're deemed as plant under health and safety laws. You might recall also in 2021 the Sale GP in Sydney, whilst no one was injured, there was some amazing footage of high winds that ended up having a major impact on the event. A number of boats were badly damaged. I think 60,000 people lost their power across New South Wales from the same incident. And of course, we're seeing that the 1 in 50 weather events is happening more like 1 in 10 or 1 in 2. And I know for our folk in New Zealand, you've been battered several times over in the last few years with major impacts that's had across local government. You'll see the others there, and most recent one you'll see there with the Vivid drone show cancellation, which was a malfunction, a technical malfunction, but unfortunately the drop zones that were designed into the planning for contingency in the event that there was a technical failure caught most of the drones that landed in the water. But again, it goes back to planning and making sure that those standoff zones, those safety zones, pyrotechnics is another example, and there's been no shortage of incidents around Australia and New Zealand where pyrotechnics have perhaps not fired in the way that they're supposed to. So I think have a healthy skepticism for anything that you're doing that could go wrong, and make sure that you're asking relevant questions. Now, you can't be an expert in everything, but I think the laws would expect you to apply a healthy level of due diligence, and make sure that you can satisfy yourself that we're doing enough. And I think that's in the eyes of the beholder, but if you're not doing anything, if you're again just handing keys over and letting the hirer or the event organizer run the show without asking any questions, I think you'll find there's a gap. All right, so I want to just talk now about the event risk management framework, as I would say. Now, I think in the past we used to see councils requesting certain risk documents, and it was on their planning checklist, and they would tick the box to say that they've received a document that's got risk or safety or security on the front cover, and that was it. They tick their box, and then they don't want to buy into more liability, so they don't open the front cover. And I would argue that there are some responsibilities that are shared between the event organizer and the council, and it is worth at least interrogating the data, the information that's been provided, to ensure that certain obvious foreseeable risks like medical emergencies and like severe weather and like emergency management have been considered by the event organizer. I think the fine line is that you're not telling them how to control those risks, but you're certainly wanting to see that the risks that are foreseeable are being addressed in a way that seems logical and good practice. And ultimately, that success usually is about a joint partnership in delivering, or at least helping to work through these phases. So we plan events, we prepare for them, we implement, we monitor. And I think if I consider back to events that I've seen or audited or worked with either the venue operator or the event organizer, it's the monitoring and responding is where we often fall down, that what is written and what actually happens on the ground don't marry up. And of course, if it ended up being subpoenaed, if an incident happened and your documentation was subpoenaed into a court and interrogated, one of those first questions would be, well, why is it that your document says you're doing this, but that isn't what happened on the ground? And for anyone on this call who sat in a coroner's court, which I have in the past, it's a very sobering experience. And for my mind, as a risk professional, I now I start with the incident and work my way backwards in planning to say to myself, have I done enough? Have we done enough to be able to demonstrate that we've done everything that's reasonable in the process to set ourselves up for success for that legal action? It's an unpleasant point to start planning, but it's a useful point to make sure that when you're applying yourself to each of these planning phases, that you are applying a healthy set of skepticism to whatever is being delivered, asking yourself what are the foreseeable risks here, and asking yourself, has whoever is preparing that documentation, if the event is risky, then are we applying a level of documentation or checking that documentation that's commensurate with that risk? And I'll talk more about that now. So low risk events probably do warrant the handing the keys over, in my view. You can't do everything, but there needs to be some way of vetting events that are risky versus those that aren't. And a process that I often say to people is, if you look back over your calendar of events over the last 2 years and lay out which was the worst event that gave you the most grief to the easiest one, and lay them in order of worst to best, and what were the things that made you nervous about them? What were the things that went wrong? Was it because there was too many people turned up, or was it because of the severe weather, or was it because there's a lot of alcohol consumed, or was it because the load-in took far longer than expected because of the level of infrastructure, or was it because the event organiser was incompetent? Whatever those things are should become your risk screening criteria, so that you develop a framework of some sort to ask yourself, we've taken a booking, these are the questions that we want to ask to find a position on what sort of risk profile this event represents. And the riskier the event, the more we want to roll the sleeves up and have a really good understanding that the event organizer has their act together and that they have full ownership in that, and that they can demonstrate that they have the ability, both financially and with competence, to be able to deliver that event safely and successfully, so it doesn't become a reputational risk for council. And there's many ways to do that risk screening, but I would encourage you, if there's one takeaway from today, is have a think about how you screen low risk, medium and high risk events, and what do you do once that happens. Once you've got a certain type of event in a category, how do you then interact with them, either that you're delivering yourself as council, as promoters, or whether you're approving those events, and therefore what are the things that you would need to be asking for to satisfy yourself that you've done enough and that they are going to be successful in their event delivery. All right, so those legal duties, I mentioned before many of those different categories, and if you're been in council a long time and you've been delivering events, I'm not telling you anything new here. Most of Australia and New Zealand, with the exception of Victoria, are aligned on the harmonised health and safety laws, which makes it useful for large event organisers or suppliers in the industry who move across states or between New Zealand and Australia. But what that does is also creates a framework where there is a cascading set of duties that sit with whoever is sitting at the top of the tree. And if you can imagine, it's like, I describe it like a sort of fishbone diagram, that each entity, and we're talking about either contractors or hirers, whoever is sitting as principal at the top of each of those nodes has a responsibility for the people below them. So I would say for council, I mean, you are the party that approves whether an event can be held or not, and therefore you are the ones also who should at least be satisfying yourself to the extent of things that you have some control over, to ask the questions of the party either as a hirer or as third-party contractors. If we're talking about contractors, again, they're being employed by either the principal, being council, or the event organiser. They then treat those contractors as workers, and the health and safety laws are very clear about that, that you can't just contract that out, that they are actually your workers. So you need to satisfy yourself, if you're engaging them, that they have their act together. The complication with that now is things like the psychosocial legislation that's been introduced in most states, which talks about things like fatigue and ensuring that the staff that are working are getting appropriate levels of breaks and so on. So it's whatever is within the remit of your area of control. Councils, again, they can't do everything, but they need to, for riskier activities, apply a higher level of due diligence. And that that other part, which is the fourth dot point there in that top section, is the members of the public. So members of the public are clearly set out as part of the parties within that duty, and therefore with public venues and events, that applies. There's many examples around Australia now where SafeWork has applied that duty of care through prosecution. And I'll give you one example. In the Northern Territory, Northern Territory Major Events Corporation was involved with a Summer Nats type activity. There was a burnout competition at the Red Centre Nats in Alice Springs. A methanol fueled vehicle sprayed exhaust into the crowd. It caught fire. 15 people were badly burnt, nobody killed. SafeWork in Northern Territory issued an enforceable undertaking on both the event organiser and the government authority that were hosting that event. And quite clearly that was an important case study for being able to demonstrate that the expectation, the duties to the third parties or the members of the public is quite clear. From my experience, that relates to if there is money changing hands in particular. So if people are being charged for that event, there are parties that are involved in hosting it who are being paid, that absolutely applies. I think the case where it doesn't apply is if it is a completely volunteer-driven event. The members of the public and those that are delivering that event, if there is no one being paid, then the health and safety laws don't apply. But I would still argue that the common law duties do, and therefore a safe approach is really to apply the same process for all events. And the basic principle for health and safety laws is that you need to identify, assess and control risks and monitor it to make sure that what you said you're going to do is being delivered. Now, at its most basic level, that means that the parties have done a risk assessment and considered the things that can go wrong that are foreseeable and are putting a plan in place to address those. If you've had a look at the health and safety regulations in your state, and if you haven't, it's a riveting read, I can assure you. I'm being facetious there. You'll need a strong coffee or two. But if you go down the regulations, you'll see there are activities there that might relate to your events. Are you doing construction-related activities? Are you building temporary infrastructure? Are you operating mobile plant or forklifts? Are you doing any rigging? Are you working at height? Are you dealing with power? And in each case, if you are doing any of those things, then those risk controls are stipulated in the regulation. You have to apply those. So a good starting point for you is ask yourself, are we doing any high-risk activities? And therefore, applying the regulations is a good starting point. Not everything in the events world is covered under the health and safety laws, and that's why it also encourages you to do a risk assessment so that you pick up any of those other things. Things like crowd management, crowd density isn't captured specifically in the health and safety laws, but there is an expectation that you've done some level of assessment. And as I mentioned before, there are many other legal areas that you also need to comply with or expect the third party, the event organiser, to also be compliant with. You see they're working with children, for example, traffic management, fire safety, liquor licensing and more. I see all around the country an ongoing discussion around what constitutes construction versus what constitutes an event build. And I see more and more an interpretation of this, that many of the things that you see, such as the photo you see here, do fall into the category of construction. And so I encourage you to be looking at, whenever there's a build that's happening that relates to the temporary infrastructure that's being installed. In particular, in this case, you'll see the operation of forklifts. You'll see the installation. There's probably people working at height at some point during the pull down or setup of this, that you look at how can I segregate that work so that the stuff that's happening that's risky is separated from the areas where the public might be operating. And the expectation then generally is, if it's high risk works, there'll be a safe work method statement that might go along with that. Now, most of these professional event organisers or suppliers to the industry will have this stuff already, but that also applies to things like white cards, which is the construction safety induction card, which every state has those, and they are relevant across states. But it's important then, again, that you're defining if there are construction related activities happening. Licensed operators, again, this is high risk mobile plant, so a forklift operator needs to have a license. So having some rules around who drives the forklift and how do we ensure that we don't have some non-licensed individual jumping on and operating and having an accident. So things like having key management systems so that there's might be a padlock or a pin lock on the forklift that only those who have the license have a copy of the pin number, keeping a copy of people's licenses, and other construction-related controls like steel cap boots and high vis, particularly when there's, again, mobile plant moving. All of those things need to be considered, or that you're encouraging the event organizer to consider, and you're looking for evidence that they've thought about that. So these are just some of the risk categories that you might think about. I mentioned the slips and trips before, and again, they will feature highly in most events and public venues. The security risks are not just the antisocial behaviour and property management, but more and more, particularly if we're hosting events that are politically sensitive. And we saw what happened at the National Press Club only a week ago, and I'm not taking sides from a political perspective, but as a venue risk professional, the fact that somebody can get into my venue and install a remote control screen and nobody question it, and then for it to be released on national television, suggests to me that things need to be tightened up, and that of course becomes a reputational risk now for every venue in the country, about questions around how we're managing spaces that have the potential for a large reputational risk or for a security incident. The crowd-related risks, we certainly see more and more in the venues industry after some of the incidents that have happened around the world, in particular Astro World, which happened a few years ago with a Travis Scott concert, and there was a crowd crush. That had a flow-on effect internationally now with recognition of crowd management and crowd management planning as a legitimate discipline within the broader safety and security remit. And we see more and more now, particularly international acts that are touring and events in Australia who are producing not just safety plans, emergency plans, but a crowd management plan that considers crowd flow, ingress, egress, and I'll talk about that in a second, as well as the environmental risks that you see there. From a crowd management perspective, again, this is an area of growth that we've seen. There's a lot of research that's been done, particularly in the United Kingdom, around crowd principles and planning about how people come to your venue or your event, how they move around your venue or event, and how they leave. So ingress, circulation, where they will view and how they leave are all important, and then planning around that. So knowing roughly if they're all coming by public transport, what times those transports will arrive, or if they've got a habit of going to the pub before the sporting event, that would generally mean that you're going to get slammed in the last 20 minutes before kickoff or before gates open. So that is something that you'll need to consider if you've got large events, large public events that have limited control and they're out in open space in particular. But questions you should be asking: how do people enter? Where do they gather? How do they move? How do they leave? And capacity planning. And again, you can be a victim of your own success. We do a lot of this work for many events and public venues around Australia and New Zealand. There are a number of methods of calculating this, and generally speaking, we apply 4 or 5 different methods, and whichever gives us the lowest capacity is the safest number. We often use a document called the Green Guide, or the Guide for Safety in Sports Grounds, which comes from the United Kingdom. If you do a search for that, you can find that. That provides, again, 5 different methods, which I won't go through now, of calculating, but things like it looks at flow rates per metre. So if I have a fire exit or an entry exit, so people can come and leave, I can get up to 82 people per linear metre per minute. And there is an assumption that fire engineers use that if it's a safe, low fire risk venue, there is an 8-minute window to get people from the danger zone to the safe zone. So you apply be 8 minutes to the 82 people per linear metre per minute, and that tells me what one of my possible capacities are. There are a range of other ways to look at it as well in terms of the square meterage and so on, but there's no use in having a large space and not enough exits, or not enough having large numbers of exits but not enough space to keep the people. So things like fire codes, of course, also stipulate some of that stuff, but they only look at it from a fire perspective. And we say with public venues, there are a number of things you'll see there that are safety factors that influence crowds and crowd behaviours, which also need to be considered. Setting a crowd capacity is very important, and having ways to manage that is as important. The crowded places issue, I've personally been involved. My daughter was across the road from Mondo Beach when that happened in December last year, and spent some time locked in a room at the back of a retail outlet. My wife was at Bondi Junction shopping and spent 2 hours locked in a storeroom in David Jones. It's a real issue for us. There is still conflict happening in the world. Our national terrorism threat level currently is still at probable, and this stuff continues to happen. Fortunately, our agencies do a terrific job at identifying possible threats, but if you're hosting events that are potentially politically sensitive, this needs to be on your radar, and you need to be getting advice around how you're managing that and tapping into any intelligence that's possible regarding threat information. And look, I won't go through this in a lot of detail. If you go onto the Australian New Zealand Counter-Terrorism Committee website, there are a range of self-assessment tools. If you're not sure if your event is on the cusp, there is a questionnaire there that provides a score, and if you decide that your score is of significance, that should be a trigger for you to be reaching out to agencies and professional help. Emergency planning. Again, I mentioned the Astro World scenario to you. I think one of the big learnings from that was you need to be able to stop the show. If we're talking about a sporting event, if we're talking about a music event, and an emergency happens, you need to be able to short circuit capacity to stop the show, which requires a sequence of things to happen, and to be able to turn the lights up and turn the music off and influence the crowd behaviour, whether that's for them to dial it down or whether it's for them to commence an evacuation. It will depend on the event. But having an emergency plan is a legal requirement. Having a way of command and control, so who is in charge, who is the decision maker, having an evacuation plan, having a medical response plan, having a plan for how we talk to each other and how we respond to an escalating incident are all normal practice in venues, and certainly you should be looking for evidence in documentation around that. I think, as I mentioned before, the weather is getting worse with climate change. It's having a significant impact on events during our summer season all over Australia and in New Zealand. There's no shortage of examples of that. And whilst you can't stop the weather from coming, you can certainly prepare for it. And you can have different thresholds within a weather plan that tells you when we have a forecast of a certain wind speed, for example, there are certain structures on our site which won't cope, and therefore we start to batten down the hatches. If we have a weather forecast that requires a potential for heat exhaustion, there are certain things that we should be able to do to minimise the impact or the consequences of that. So that requires some severe weather thinking, and again, you would be expecting the event organiser to be doing that, and you're checking it. Again, I go back to my point about a risk-based approach. You can't do everything, but if you do nothing, if you ask no questions and just throw them the keys, I think you'll be found wanting. And there's lots of examples now out there of where there's an expectation that you are rolling the sleeves up and having a look. For those that have delivered events in Western Australia, for example, as a result of the Racing the Planet incident years ago with the the athletes that were burnt out in the outback. You will now know, of course, the West Australian government requires a risk management plan, or at least a risk assessment, to have been completed and signed off by a competent third party. Now, that's one of the extreme examples, but that has a direct impact on every event, on the bottom line of every event, because they have to pay for companies like us to review those documents and sign off on them. Have a way of screening those events, and when you decide that it is high risk, be prepared to roll the sleeves up more and ask more questions to satisfy yourself. Event day monitoring, I've mentioned already, and again, what you don't want is that a plan sits on the shelf and what happens on the ground differs. So have a think about, particularly for those high risk events, what sort of things you will do to manage and monitor. Who will do it, whether it's rangers, whether it's your events team might go down, but have an agreed process for the things that you're looking out for that represent high risk for council and the event organiser, and make sure that you're verifying that they're doing what they said they'd do. Finally, that last part of the process, once the event's finished, have an agreed way of reviewing and checking, identifying any damage, collating any incident reports, closing out with third-party suppliers, monitoring community feedback, and getting better, learning lessons. So often we focus on all the good stuff and then we don't wrap around and ask ourselves, is there anything we've learned out of this? Can we do it better? And it's not just learning from our own events, it's learning from other events. I'd encourage you to have a committee that looks at this stuff, and regularly, if you've got some templates that you use as risk registers for different types of events, use that learning and go back and ask yourself, do we need to update our templates? Is there anything more that we can do to get better? Emerging risks, I've talked about weather. We all know about social media. Security expectations, I think, continues to grow. Artificial intelligence is not listed here, of course, but it's certainly something that we see more and more impacting, and impacting both in a positive and negative way for events. Volunteer shortages, we certainly saw that post-COVID, and whilst that's getting better, I think we'll see over the next couple of years there'll be more and more skill shortages as the Brisbane Olympics comes more online, and every tradie on the West Coast will move to Queensland. The insurance market continues to suffer major hits, and we end up paying for that, all of us. And the community expectations, there's becoming, I think they're less and less tolerating of a bad experience. The customer expectations around having great experiences, events, continues to grow, and striking that balance between safety and customer experience is the challenge that we all have. The takeaways, and I'm getting close to running out of time for Q&A, I apologise, but risk management shouldn't be about saying no to everybody. It should be about how can we make it happen, and using it as a way of opening that dialogue, ensuring that there's clarity around what are the council's responsibilities, where does the line start and stop, and again, you might need to get some legal advice as to what the appetite and tolerance levels are for council, but you need to be clear on what are the responsibilities of the event organiser, what are the joint responsibilities and those of council. Crowd management, as I said, is a growing discipline. Weather is something that is continuing to challenge us all, and if nothing else that you take from this is apply a risk-based approach and look at ways of how you can screen events and what do you do that's going to satisfy yourself around higher risk events versus lower risk events. I am done, and I'm sorry I said we'd have 15 minutes of questions. We've got 5 or so, but I'm going to throw back to Teresa now. Just have you been vetting the Q&A? Is there stuff that
we have one question in the chat. I'm going to invite anyone who has any last minute questions to go ahead and feel free to ask some questions now in either the chat or the Q&A tool at the bottom right corner of your screen. But I will ask you, our first question is from Donna Blythe, and Donna is asking, for our regular hirers, should should we be requesting a copy of their health and safety policy and or procedures as standard practice?
Yes, I would think so. At least, once a year, I would be getting, if it's a rinse and repeat many times over, it's a fine line that you tread. If things don't change much, then maybe getting it once a year or once every couple of years is fine. What you don't want is an accident that happens and that you don't have any documentation that shows that you've applied a reasonable level of due diligence for risks that are foreseeable. So I would say yes. It's the same with suppliers. Often we see councils have a relationship with tradespeople or other preferred suppliers that perhaps haven't been inducted in many years, or this is the way we've always done it. And we see that quite often. I would say to those people that the laws have changed. They changed 10 years ago, and the expectations continue to change, and the risks change. So we need to, again, satisfy ourselves that the people who are working to help deliver these events for us are in a position to tick the right boxes and that can prove that they have the appropriate qualifications. Being able to justify this is the way we've always done it so we don't rock the boat, I think would not set you up for success if you had to answer questions in court.
Yep, that's fair enough. That's a great response. Well, we haven't got any more questions in the chat, but I have a question. If I put on my community venue or council venue operator hat, and I've listened to everything that you said today, and there's been so much. It's been so wonderful. Thank you, Wayne. You've covered everything from slips, trips and falls to very significant risks with overcrowding and even terrorist threats. So there's a lot to take in. And I guess what I was wondering was, if I have listened to all of this today and I'm a bit concerned that I don't have everything covered, where should I start? What should be the first step that I take after listening to you speak today to make sure that I'm on the right track and that I'm making sure that I know that you said doing nothing is not an answer, and doing everything is sometimes too much. So what would be the first step?
At a minimum, I'd be looking at where are we most vulnerable? What are the events that give us the most grief? And ask ourselves then, of that, what are the risks that are foreseeable that we're simply not addressing? And if you're not sure what they are, we'll start with, as a minimum, what does the law say? And again, I'd encourage you to go to the health and safety regulations in your state, click on the link and run down the list and ask yourself, are we doing any of that? Or is the event organizer doing any of that? Because that's the bare minimum. And if you need to look at where can we learn more, the Institute of Venue Safety and Security, here's the shameless plug, it's through the Venue Managers Association. If you go onto the VMA's website, I think it's vma.org.au, it's a 2-year, 5-day course that's held in Sydney. It's in August this year. It's a terrific sort of grounding in all things relating to venues and events for safety and security. It's the only one of its kind in Asia Pacific, so that's another port of call. There are conferences from time to time that happen around. I think there's one that's in Sydney in July, VSX Exchange. That's just a 1-day, conference. So there's a number of ways that people can engage in this to upskill themselves. But doing nothing, I think, is kind of burying their head in the sand. There's an accepted standard now, some written and some not, around what good practice looks like in the venues and events industry. I've been teaching it through the Venue Management School. Again, it's a institution through the VMA for about 25 years. And so, that's flowed on to people who operate stadiums, arenas, performing arts centres, convention centres, exhibition centres, event organisers, council-run organisations, universities. Everyone's getting that training now. So that's filtering on, and you can see it with some of the coronial inquests and some of the court findings about the expectation that the courts have around what good looks like. So there's lots of places you can go looking, and find stuff. But again, doing nothing is probably not an option anymore.
Yep. That's really great feedback. Thank you so much, Wayne. Well, we're actually at time, so that's all that we have time for today. I just wanted to take this opportunity to say, yeah, thank you again. It's been a really great session. We've covered so much, and I'm sure everyone will be really keen to get their hands on your slides and to learn more. So just a reminder that we will be sharing a recording of the session today, as well as Wayne's contact details and his slides with everyone who registered. The next thing I wanted to do is my own shameless plug is please register for our next collab, which is coming out on the 28th of July. The topic is going to be how to manage a venue with a small team and a shoestring budget. So I'm sure that a lot of the registrants here today could learn some valuable things from that upcoming session. Finally, just a big thank you to everyone for tuning in. We really appreciate your time. If you're interested in learning any more about SpacetoCo, you can follow the QR code on your screen now, or you can visit our website to book a demo. But that's it from me. Have a lovely rest of your day, and we look forward to working with you all soon. Thank you.